Welcome to Travel Stories with Trevor Mountcastle and Tom Kim. This episode, we talk returning to Asia. How are you, Tom?
I'm pretty good, Trevor.
So, Tom, this week, this is actually kind of for me, a little bit of a trip report from my perspective, because I was the one that made it back to Asia after, it had to have been like three and a half years.
What do you mean? We went to Manila last year.
Yes, there we go. The new episode title is A Return to Singapore and Bali.
Okay, I guess if you want to be more specific and say Southeast Asia, okay, fine.
Yeah. No, well, this is the first time with the family, and I thought it was kind of an interesting thing. And, our trip to Manila was kind of rushed. This almost felt a little bit rushed, even though it was a 10-day trip, just going over President's Day weekend, trying to get, best we could. Just like we've shared in other things, award flights are still really, really hard. And they're even harder for Southeast Asia, and I think anywhere in Asia other than going to Japan. And that might not even be a true statement anymore now that Japan is opened.
I was about to say, I don't even know if that's still a true statement. Yeah, I think it's still even hard to get a ticket to Japan. And of course, we just had that recent devaluation on Alaska. So that made it a little bit more expensive to get there too.
Yeah, maybe that'll help on the award flights. But gosh, Alaska's got a really bad narrative there. I mean, what was it like, 5-6 years ago? They do this no notice devaluation. I remember with Emirates, I was trying to book a flight on Alaska's website at the same exact time that they were like changing the award charts. I was watching these awards go up in price literally in real time. I don't know that anybody was doing that with Japan Airlines, but another time after that Emirates one, hey, we'll give notice. No, they didn't stay true to their word.
Yeah, they don't have too much credibility there now. I remember that too, because I was just about to collect 100,000 Alaska miles. I was like, yes, I have just enough to book some Emirates and of course, couldn't anymore.
Yeah. Well, RIP for that wonderful Emirates. For 100,000, you could fly anywhere from the U.S. except for Oceania. And then if you just wanted to go to the Middle East, I think it was only 80,000? Such a deal for first class.
Yep. But, it sounds like you had some success regardless of the turmoil or the difficulty. It sounds like you were able to get your family of 3 all the way to Southeast Asia. I'd love to hear you walk through that itinerary with us.
Yeah, so I had the way home for probably a good, few weeks, maybe even a little longer than that. And we kept on tweaking it, trying to figure out, where we were ultimately going to go. We didn't end up narrowing in how we were going to get out there until about 2 weeks before, when we saw the Washington Dulles to London on the Saturday before. I think it was the Saturday before President's Day weekend, or President's Day, became available. Now, obviously, leaving on a Saturday night, for a week-long trip, you already lost a day. And connecting in Europe, you lose another day. So, 10 days ends up becoming only about, I think, 6 nights actually on the ground. But we got that United flight to Heathrow. I had a 3-4 hour layover in Heathrow. Perfect amount of time to get breakfast, shower. And then we boarded really the creme de la creme of the trip. We get that London to Singapore on Singapore's A380. Not only that, but we got one of 3 pairs of seats that essentially gives you pretty close to a double bed. So, here we have a bulkhead seat. The seat was so big, our daughter had no problem just chilling in the seat. My wife had plenty of room. I almost imagine that Qatar Q Suites is this good.
This was a newer business class seat, right? Is this one that Singapore started installing on the 380s maybe, a year or 2 ago? How long ago was it, do you think?
I thought it might have been 3 years, because
3 years?
I remember seeing the suites before that pandemic.
Right.
I thought it was just starting to roll out. So maybe it's 3 years. Incidentally, they let us go up forward and get to check out the suites as well, which are pretty nice, really spacious. Much better executed, in my opinion, than the Etihad apartments.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, it definitely looks that way from the photos. I unfortunately haven't had a chance to try it yet. Hopefully we'll get the opportunity one of these days.
We're right in that same boat. Very soon it'll be trying to find 3 seats or just doing a solo trip, and neither of those are easy options.
I think 3 first-class suites on the same flight, that is a pretty high goal there. Maybe there'll be some sort of interesting award release, and they've been known to happen. We've been the beneficiaries of those in the past.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. The last time we did this route, I think it was July of 2020, 2014 that Singapore just like released to Star Alliance everything, it felt like. And we ended up flying for New Year's Eve in 2012, I think. New Year's Eve at 2012 in first class.
So what was memorable other than the double bed option on business class? Or was there anything else that was pretty memorable about this flight?
I felt like the service, I mean, Singapore to me reminds me of, or makes me think of what Pan Am was like, right? Like just the quality of the service, the refinedness of it.
Well, I've never actually flown Pan Am, so.
I haven't flown Pan Am either, but like the way the movies make it look and everything, I just feel like Singapore is kind of like that modern day equivalent.
So they're holding the torch for the flying service that people had in the bygone era, huh?
That's what I would say. Yeah, so I thought the seat was fantastic. Seat was absolutely so much better than I expected. It is the seat that Singapore has owed its flyers forever because this one laid back. It didn't flip forward.
That is a big change. When I think Singapore business, I think flip forward.
Exactly. And the footwell, because we were in the bulkhead, we had so much footroom in that footwell. I mean, this suite, I was going to say call it a room almost, because the seat was so big. It was probably the most comfortable business class seat I've slept in.
Did you do book the cook?
We did. And trying to think, I think my wife did lobster thermidor and I did a nice, whatever the nicest steak was. I thought it was really, really nicely done. Sometimes that can go a little bit poorly on a plane, even if you get a really good cut of meat, they just overcook it or something to that effect. This was really well done, not overly done.
The doneness was to your liking.
Yes. Yeah. I think the most memorable part for us was the fact that seat was just so much better than what we'd always remembered when we think of Singapore. The cushioning had the right level of softness or versus firmness of every other seat that they have. The crew was just very attentive. They gave our daughter not one but two little stuffed Singapore bears.
Oh, nice.
It was truly a really nice experience. Yeah, I don't normally like to be in those middle seats because I feel like you don't get to see anything. Just the sight lines for the windows worked out really well. The only complaint I'd say is that IFE, it was tired for me. Watching the in-flight entertainment, there wasn't a ton of options even for the first flight. And so by the time I got off our last flight, I was really over much of their offering.
Well, I mean, you did spend quite a bit of time in the air. I'd say my one big complaint with Singapore business in particular is no amenity kits. Is that still the case?
So they give you like a little sleeve almost that has, I think, a moisturizer and like the eye shades and there was like one or two other things. They might have given you socks, but yeah, you don't get that high end amenity kit like you're, like you and I are used to on a lot of other airlines.
I mean, I'm sure it's a sustainability type thing and they want to and you can still get all the things, like they have them in the bathroom and you can ask the flight attendants for stuff, but it's just not the same, I think.
Yeah, but they've been doing that for as long as I've flown Singapore. I mean, that's never been really a thing in business.
I agree. Yeah, that's always been the pet peeve, at least for me, for business and on Singapore.
Yeah. No, I just say that because I don't think it's a sustainability thing. I think that's just what they do.
Well, I mean, I think it's a sustainability thing that maybe they started a long time ago, but well, regardless. I'm excited to hear about the next leg of the flight, though. That was a special one, wasn't it?
Yeah, so this is one of those things that, the background of this flight, originally we had a flight to Bangkok and we were going to fly on Singapore. And then we said, you know what, Bangkok's looking a little bit more complicated than we want to navigate with a 16-month-year-old, a 15-month-old, really. And so we said, well, we know Bali. Bali's got super cheap hotels and everything. And I had just seen the day before Singapore Airlines, Singapore to Bali. So I'm like, okay, let me see what I can find. Nope. A day goes by. And that flight was completely gone. But then I see this little jewel of a flight that for an airline I'd never flown. Now, I know that for even you, that's probably pretty surprising.
And it's a pretty major airline. It's one that you've kind of left out of your repertoire for a good amount of time, where you've been in this hobby. And it's actually surprising it has taken you this long to fly this airline, because we've talked about it several times.
And something, I have to say the reason I wasn't flying them was because of their business class seat. And I'm here to tell you, I was remembering that seat much more harshly than it ultimately was. So
was it the 222 on this flight? I actually am not sure which equipment you flew.
Yeah, it was a 777.
777, okay.
It was either a 777-200 or 300 ER. I can't remember, but it was the 222 configuration. I was hoping that they'd have that newer configuration where they have that similar seat with a reverse herringbone. I feel like we're burying the lead a little bit deeply.
Oh, yeah. I guess we need to actually tell them what this flight is. and let alone what the airline is.
So one of the fun things about Asia is that you've got all these Fifth Freedom flights, right? And one of the Freedom flights that you can fly from Singapore to Bali happens to be on KLM. And it's just kind of like a tag up flight because they fly in from Amsterdam. They get a little bit of a break. I think they switch out air crews and then they go to Bali. Then they come back from Bali and then they fly back to Amsterdam. And this flight was good. It ended up costing 55,000 Virgin Atlantic miles for all three of us.
Okay, got it.
So Virgin and BA will allow you to pay miles equivalent of, or I guess the rough equivalent of how much the 10% cost is for an infant. Yeah, so 55,000 points for the three of us, business class. It was not what I really wanted to spend, having spent like 90,000 or 87,500 to get there. But the reality was it was the award we needed, and it was a new flight, a new airline, new experience, and again that Fifth Freedom flight. And we got those. It's probably the shortest flight that you get those little. What are those gin houses called?
I don't actually know off the top of my head, but they're filled with kind of Dutch gin. I think it's like, I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's from a company called Bols, Bols, I think is a distillery. And it's KLM, Royal Dutch Airlines is the flight that you took, right? This is the airline that you've somehow managed to avoid for many, many years. Probably not intentionally, right?
Yeah, exactly. Actually, a little bit intentionally. I thought that seat was really, really bad with the 222.
Yeah, it's not the best seat.
Yeah, it's not aisle access. It has a small cubby hole for your feet. And it's not the type of seat that I personally would go out of my way to fly, other than this particular flight.
I think this airline, though, in particular, I think a lot of the soft service, like a lot of those things are the things that really, forgive a lot of sins, basically. So I think getting the little Dutch Delft houses, the little, white and blue houses that is a tradition for this airline, they give out in business class to every passenger, on their long haul flights.
And not so long haul. This was only a 2-hour flight and we got those.
Well, typically on the long haul flights. But that's something to look forward to when you fly KLM. And, I would say KLM also, I think their catering is a little bit above standard. At least in my experience flying KLM in business has been that way. I've usually enjoyed the meals that they've served. I think the Dutch service on board has been, maybe a little bit more curt, but, it's still pretty good. I didn't have a problem with any of the flight attendants or the service I received in my past experience.
I really did feel like it was very good. I was much more impressed. I think I went in expecting, Air France caliber service, and it definitely was superior to Air France. These flight attendants knew they were taking people to, a holiday. They had a little bit of liveliness to them and that little, kind of enjoyment, almost kind of like what you get on some of those flights to Hawaii. I mean, there wasn't a halfway to Bali competition, though, but it was a late flight.
But, that's a really cool Fifth Freedom flight. I'm glad you finally got to experience KLM and their in-flight service. And you finally have some of these Delft houses full of gin that are now part of your airline memorabilia collection. I know I've got a couple as well. And definitely, I think one of the highlights of flying KLM in business is, the nice souvenir. I mean, it's got to be one of the most iconic souvenirs from a business class flight that you can get in, I would say, almost in the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it was kind of funny because my wife was sleeping for most of that flight. I ate, and then they came around with chocolates. I got her chocolate. I got a chocolate for myself. And she wakes up and she's like, "Did I miss the houses?" And I'm like, "Oh, they came around with chocolates. I'm concerned. Maybe they don't give the houses on a flight this length." And so we sighed and sort of said, well, I guess we'll hope, right? But I was starting to lose hope. We were already on the descent, and they finally come around with the houses. And my wife knocks me. She's like, "See, they do give them." And we were both a little bit excited about that.
Well, that was a special flight, but I guess you had a pretty interesting flight on the way back, too. I mean, I think there was another kind of unique leg to this trip from what it sounded like.
Yeah, so actually kind of two, sort of two. So we ended up flying Singapore back from Bali to Singapore, and that was on a 787-10, which was a first for me.
Oh, interesting.
That seat was actually also the new style seat, I think, because it felt a whole lot more comfortable than the seat on our last flight.
So they actually flew the intercontinental equipped Singapore plane because, I've flown that route too, and I've had intra-Asia business as well, and I think it was probably on something similar to a 787. I'm trying to remember what equipment I was flying when I've done Singapore out of
Bali.
Bali.
They used to do a lot of A330s, and they'd be in the regional business. But
Yes.
sometime during the pandemic, they started changing their product around and kind of giving that lay flat even on what would be, almost borderline domestic, flights. I say borderline because there's no such thing as a domestic flight out of Singapore. It's one of the more unique airports and countries. They have no domestic flights.
Makes perfect sense.
It does. But can you think of another country that has no domestic flights?
Well, what about Hong Kong?
Well, but Hong Kong, that's almost China at this point.
You got to think about all the other city states in the world, I guess. Which there aren't, I guess, a ton,
Yeah.
I could probably think a lot of Caribbean nations probably don't have any domestic flights.
Yeah, but then when you think about it, you've got the Dutch islands, you've got the U.S. Virgin Islands. How many Caribbean islands are their own unique country? I mean, even Jamaica, I think, ascribes to the king.
Well, they're part of the Commonwealth, but I think they're their own countries now. So even though they are part of the Commonwealth and they do recognize their sovereign as, now King Charles, I don't think they're actually, their citizens are not British citizens. They're citizens of the Commonwealth.
Okay. Well, we might have to come back on that trivia for another time when we can actually research it. But I would offer Singapore is probably the largest country to have no domestic flights.
Probably true.
So anyway, you had alluded to that other really memorable flight, and that was the longest operated flight, I suppose, by distance in the commercial air world, flying from Singapore to John F. Kennedy Airport. Ironic that I've darkened JFK's door more in the last 2 years than I did in the preceding 3 or 4, even probably 2 or 3 years before the pandemic. But this was operated on an A350-900 ULR, and the flight, I think it was booked at 18 hours, 45 minutes or so, but ended up being only 17 hours and 30 minutes. Maybe
only
booked
17
at a little
hours.
bit shorter. Yeah, only. Only.
That's an incredible amount of time on one flight.
With a 15-month-old. Yeah,
Ooh.
yeah, that was definitely an interesting experience. I was thankful because we got to the airport just a little bit early, not too early, but we got there early enough to go by the Silver Cruise Lounge, and they had my favorite champagne. They're only the second lounge I've been in that has my favorite champagne, which is Tatinga. So that started the trip out really well. And then we got on the flight. Other than that seat just being so uncomfortable, it's just too firm. When they do the fold forward, and it's not easy to fold them back. So I felt like our seats were just in the fold forward the entire 17, not the whole 17 hours, but I'd say probably about 14 or 15 hours of that 17 and a half hour flight. Our seats were in the most uncomfortable but flat position, whether we wanted to be laying down or if we were sitting Indian style.
I'm surprised that they didn't give their longest flight in the world, the newer seats,
I am very surprised as well.
Seems like that should have been the first ones they replaced. But you know what? I mean, I guess they were planning on I guess they did a full retrofit of the A380 and, I guess the 350-900s or ULRs probably were. Or wait, were they 1000s or 900s? They were 900s, weren't they?
They're 900s, yeah. I think they ordered them before the refits. And there was probably something about might have been something with the weight of the seat or something too, because I mean, these aircraft didn't even have the overhead storage in the middle, which was actually kind of nice sitting in the middle, right? Because you had a little bit more headspace. But I mean, it was interesting, the little things that you notice. This A350-900 ULR does not have an economy. It's only business, and it's only business and premium economy. And premium economy is literally probably only 10 rows. I didn't go that far back. I mean, I kind of peered and it looked short. It could have been 10 or 15 rows. It's not a lot. I mean, you're behind the wing by that point.
I mean, part of that's because of the range, right? Because, it's a ULR because I guess it's basically a flying gas tank and they need to weight restrict it. So the way you do that is you have fewer people on the plane. And the way you do that is you make it all premium.
Yeah, yeah. And don't get me wrong, it was wonderful. The onboard product was great other than the hard product. And the space really did, it felt nice. It was not a full flight. It was anything but a full flight. I think I saw probably 6 or 8 empty seats in business class alone. This was a little bit of a wonky one with book to cook because they serve 3 meals, but they only let you book to cook for 2. And so you had to sort of, make a decision because that last meal was only like a snack. And candidly, I was unimpressed with that snack. But for the first meal, I think I got myself a steak. Again, my wife got the lobster thermidor. That proved, we think, to not be the smartest of moves because she let our daughter have a little bit, and there was a little bit of tossing of cookies.
It's a little aggressive doing lobster thermidor for a 15-month-old.
It might have been. And so I'll kind of break this up into the experience and then the family experience, I'll say. That first meal was good. And then the second meal was somewhere between 6 and 9 hours. It was really kind of weird because, we're resting. Most of us are sleeping. And then, you start hearing, a little jingling in the kitchen, and they kind of come by and they're like, okay, you ready for your next meal? And I'm like, I've been literally sleeping and not doing anything. I can go a little bit more than 6 hours between meal snacks. I asked them to hold it closer to arrival. They did. It still didn't end up being perfect, but it was nice to at least have something a little bit more substantive. I would recommend anybody that is flying that route from Singapore to JFK, because even their like mid-flight snacks were not really hearty. Going from JFK to Singapore seemed a lot more a bigger spread. I personally would recommend anybody hold your meal later in the flight so that you're not getting off that flight hungry.
That's surprising for a Singapore flight. I always felt like I was well fed on Singapore, generally.
Well, and it's funny because I mean, and remember, I'm a little bit more picky because I don't eat seafood most of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I had asked for like 2 different things off the mid-flight snacks, and they're like, no, we only do that from JFK to Singapore. I guess because it's like an hour and 15 minutes longer flight.
Interesting.
But yeah, so had I not held my second meal, I probably would have gotten off that flight pretty hungry. Something to think about when you're on a 17 and a half hour marathon flight, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. I was thinking about your comment about how it was kind of empty. And when I think about it, they're also running the Newark to Singapore route as well, right? Simultaneously. So they've got 2 separate A350 900s flying back and forth from Singapore, aren't they?
Yeah, and I would offer that depending upon your purposes, it seems like it's almost timed that you want to fly from the US to Singapore out of JFK because you leave late and you get in at like 5 or 6 a.m. in the morning. But then you want to leave late out of Singapore and fly into Newark because you leave late. I think it's like 11 or midnight. And then you land at like 5 a.m. in the morning in Newark. So it's almost like the 2 flights make it perfect for the people that want to like land and go to work, or land and hit the ground running for touring. You just have to like switch it up between those 2 airports. And they're so close. It seems almost planned the way they sort of did that, those 2 different flight times.
Well, it just seems like a lot of lift to Singapore compared to what it was. Because, I don't think it was always JFK and Newark both running that route. I felt like it was traditionally more Newark, right?
I think it was only Newark. I would dare to say that those extra, 20 miles just were not bearable on that old A3, what was it, an A340 500?
Yeah, it was definitely an A340 back in the day. That would have been almost a decade ago, probably.
It could be that they just couldn't make it to JFK. It could be that they preferred being with their Star Alliance partner. But yeah, they only had the Newark in the past. It was Newark and LA. And now I think it's JFK, Newark, and then you've got San Francisco. I thought was a direct. I know United does direct. And then you got LA. But I think the New York airports and LA are the longest ones.
Yep. Well, and they're competing now with United, right? Now they've got some, intra-alliance competition on that route.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Yeah. So then I guess the other thing I'd say is from a family experience, you're taking a 15-month-old on a 17 and a half hour flight. That 12-hour flight on the way from London to Singapore had been her previous long flight. To give you an idea of how all in we went on, number one, going around the world, which is kind of cool for, an under 2-year-old to be able to say, hey, I went around the world, when she can actually say that. And for her parents who can brag that way.
I would say the parents who can brag is probably the bigger thing for you guys.
Yeah, I'd say you're right. So this was a little bit aggressive. I mentioned before, we gave her a little bit of the lobster thermidor. That was a little bit too much. We think that was too rich. She tossed her cookies and then promptly felt fine after we got her, changed and kind of, freshen her up. She was fine. The Singapore flight attendants were so perfect. I mean, I don't know how they knew, but she tossed her cookies. They were out helping, here's a bag for the dirty onesie. Here's, here's some towels, switch out things. They were fantastic. And then toward the end of the flight, she just wasn't feeling too well. And I think it was just a long flight. I won't go into details, but there was a run to the lab as soon as we got off an active runway. But again, the flight attendants were just really, really supportive. They were wonderful. The only thing that they tried to do that they weren't successful with was at one point they did offer to kind of carry her, hold her, walk her up the aisle at one point, just to give my wife a break so she could eat. And our daughter just wasn't having it. And that's just because our daughter doesn't do daycare, so she's not as used to strangers. But, they tried. They were right there, just a fantastic crew, and just that Singapore service that is just insurmountable. Maybe insurmountable is the wrong word, but I mean, I just think they just have their processes so refined and they do it so well.
They set a high bar. I mean, you rarely hear about a bad Singapore crew. I mean, it's hard to hear anything about Singapore Airlines service and not have people gush over how attentive and how friendly and how genuine, the people aren't, I've flown them quite a bit, and I would agree. It's very hard for me to think of a time or an encounter with the Singapore Airlines staff member that wasn't, just top notch, and kind of like exemplary for the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the funny thing, and I don't know why this comes to mind, but just walking through Kenji Airport and you see those Singapore, the Singapore flight attendants in those, what is it, the Baltic design uniforms, the dresses?
Like batik or something. But I think they're actually designed by Givenchy, I think. I think it's actually a French designer, isn't it?
But I think it's a batik design.
It's a traditional style, but the actual designer, I think, is a French designer, believe it or not.
And I would believe that. But the thing that's striking to me is think about how many times, Delta's gone from one color to another, or United's changed their flight attendant uniforms, or American's been on, gotten class action lawsuits because the flight attendant uniforms that they give them make people itch or otherwise break out. Singapore hasn't changed in as long as I can think of. I mean, at least over a decade. It's timeless.
I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry for Singapore Girl. It's coined 1972, and I was wrong. It was a French designer, but it's Balmain, not Givenchy.
There you go. I'm not familiar with Balmain, so I would have believed the Givenchy. And I can't even pronounce it as well as you can.
They're the shampoo purveyor for Grand Hyatt.
Oh, that one.
Yes.
So they do clothing design and shampoos.
Well, you know how a lot of fashion houses are. They do fragrance and they do lots of different things. So, they slap their name on stuff and sell it for money.
And so they haven't changed their uniform since 1972, you said?
If Wikipedia is to be believed, yes.
I believe it. That's a lot. That's a long time. That's commitment. I love it.
Yeah,
and they're still timeless.
It's classic. I mean, and, it is definitely, it's an icon of Singapore Airlines. There really is not, at this point, for them to change it would probably be really hard. Because, you almost have to think of these, when you think of Singapore Airlines, it's synonymous with the kind of the Singapore Girl flight attendant uniform.
It truly is.
So there was only one more flight, which is kind of, I guess, a letdown after all of these amazing flights that you had coming back home, right?
Oh, is that even worth talking about?
Probably not, but I don't know. It's on the list, right?
Yeah, this is one of those things. Like, I try not to get, wrapped up about it. I know some people get really wrapped up about, different things. So we ended up finding, we were going to drive home. And I was like, okay, we're going to land at 5 p.m. and I'm going to try to drive home that night, or I'm going to, be in for another hotel room. And I was just really ready to be home. So ended up finding American Airlines for 16,000 points per person, which is egregious, but it was the flight we wanted. And I wasn't thinking clearly enough to go through BA to try to book it via BA. But we got that JFK Reagan National DCA flight. And literally only had like 2 hours between when we were scheduled to land and when this flight was going to be taking off. Ended up getting my farewell upgrade from American Airlines Executive Platinum status to first class, and it effectively was just a seat. They didn't give us any pre-departure beverages. The pilot said it would be a 35-minute flight, which ended up being about an hour and 25 minutes because they ended up taking the tour of the National Capital Region. And the pilot gets on and says, hey, there's going to be some turbulence, so we're going to ask the flight attendants not to bother serving today. And so all that leads up to literally I could have just taken a bus. I mean, I hate to say it that way, but the flight attendants, despite supposed turbulence, which never happened, spent the entire time cloistered in the little galley area with the curtain in and proceeded to do absolutely nothing.
That sounds pretty actually normal for New York to DC kind of flights, actually.
I feel like I at least get one drink, whether it's on the ground or in the air. I've always gotten at least one drink in first.
You haven't flown that route enough.
Yeah, I probably have only done it maybe, six or so times in the last few years. Maybe more than a few
And I wouldn't beat yourself up about booking it with Avios because, 16,000 per person, that's probably not a saver award. So there probably wouldn't have been Avios availability.
Yeah, that's consoling. I'm finding that with my status waning with American, I'm not nearly as stingy with my American miles. If I find a flight that I think is going to work well, I probably shouldn't because it's still really hard to generate American miles. But I think that's probably a topic for another show.
I will point out, for our listeners that, those that are booking Avios for American flights, if you are successful in getting your American Elite number added to that award reservation, I think I have still been getting upgraded. So that's another little tip for those type of routes.
You think that works with Alaska as well, since Alaska is now one world?
It's a great question. I haven't thought to actually book an Alaska flight using Avios. There's probably only a very small use case for those, unlike American, which actually does have a lot of short haul, like DC or, New York type flights. There aren't too many short haul Alaska flights. They're mostly up, I guess, in the Northwest or West Coast.
Well, and I was almost thinking the other way. You book that same JFK DCA, but instead of putting your American number in, you put your MVP Gold 75
Oh, right.
number
Oh,
in.
interesting. Yeah, that might work. That probably would work too, you would think. It's all based on America's upgrade algorithm, right?
You'd think, unless they're doing that specifically because of their BA partnership.
Well, I don't think they want you to be able to do it. I usually have to go through a couple of machinations involving Royal Jordanian or Finnair and go into their website and messing around in Amadeus, I guess, and trying to, basically, which is what I did the last time. I just kind of went in there and started mashing around with my frequent flyer settings on my PNR. And lo and behold, got my American number in there and got upgraded.
Yeah. Sometimes you got to do some serious calisthenics to change around frequent flyer numbers once you get something booked. Every so often, just like this case, it's worth the effort.
Now that we've kind of, heard about all your kind of really interesting flights to Southeast Asia, I'd love to hear a little bit more about Singapore and Bali themselves. So do you want to start in Singapore?
So Singapore, we had kind of two different experiences. We had a long layover where we went to the Jewel. The Jewel is essentially a big mall that is landside at the airport. And they've got this gorgeous waterfall that operates, ironically enough, it doesn't start until, I think, 11 a.m. in the morning. At night, they project colors on it. And it's really, really gorgeous. Other than that, it's really largely just a mall. I hate to put it that way, but, it's a nice place to go. They had some good food. We ended up trying Shake Shack there. Probably wouldn't do that again.
Singapore Shake Shack, huh? Why, was it not good?
Yeah, I just didn't enjoy it. I should have tried dim sum or something, that I couldn't just go, around the corner for.
Well, you were in Asia for like a week. I think you can be forgiven to try in an American eatery, at least once during the week in Asia.
Yeah. And kind of, to that point, I think we did go to Din Tai Fung. We did go to Din Tai Fung the first day we got in after our stay in Bali. The beauty of the Andaz Singapore is that it's really close to the mall just escaped me because there's a mall on every corner. But the Andaz Singapore is fairly close to a mall with a Din Tai Fung. So we had gone over to that one. And then we had some dim sum.
I think
with
Singapore is one of those cities where when you say a mall with a Din Tai Fung, you still have to be more specific.
It was like Marina Bay.
Yeah, it's like Marina Bay, or it could be like the Sun City, or it could be like there's like a whole bunch of... No,
that's what it was. It was Sun City. It was Sun City because I think Marina was a little bit further away.
Yeah.
But the thing I love about Singapore is it's so walkable. We took 3 cabs in our 2 days there, and 2 of those 3 cabs were to and from the airport because that's really the only direction or distance that you really need to take a cab. We went to visit friends that lived in Robertson Quay or Quay, depending upon how you like to say it. I've heard it on tour buses. I've heard Clark Quay, and it's spelled Quay, and they call it Clark Quay. So apparently there's a number of quays up the river, and Clark is the closest to the Marina Bay. And then you've got Robertson, and then there's a couple of others. So we learned a little bit about that. But here we end up going to Robertson Quay and walked with our friends all the way down to Clark Quay.
It wasn't oppressively hot. Was the weather pretty nice or something?
No, it was pretty good. It was. I'd say it was 80s. Okay. It was probably in the 80-degree range. But walk along the river was really, really nice. It's something that we had never done before. There's a lot of nice eateries if you get a little bit further inland from Clark Quay. Nice eateries, a mixture of Western and Asian because it's largely an expat area. We went to a museum that had a nice child's kids exhibit. Our daughter promptly slept through all of that, but we were good with that. Some sensory stuff, and then dim sum at one of their new malls. We also had the time to check out the Merlion statue, which is that kind of famed statue fountain.
Symbol of Singapore.
Yes, the symbol of Singapore. It's still amazing to me how walkable the city is if you know how to walk it. I was rusty walking from the Andes. We walked by the Raffles Hotel and we walked down to Merlion earlier in the day and ended up, having to carry the stroller downstairs because I didn't realize that there was a bridge on the other side that was completely, accessible. Everything was nice and easy. Ended up finding that on the way out. But, just such a walkable city. You can almost walk anywhere and not even need the MTR, which is their mass transit.
It's a pretty compact city, a lot of people living in a pretty small area. So that kind of doesn't surprise me too much. But I'd love to hear more about the Anda Singapore. It's definitely one of the hotels that I haven't been to. I've been to Singapore a couple times, but managed to not visit the Anda. So I forget. I guess it didn't open that long ago, I guess.
No, it's fairly new. I think it was open the last time. Maybe it was open the last time we went through. I can't remember when it truly opened, but it was a fairly new hotel. It was definitely feeling new when we got there. That Andaz does different things. Like every other Andaz I've been to has like some kind of wine hour, and they give you like one drink ticket per person, and that's it for your stay.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
I didn't love that experience. I ended up, and I don't like to complain, but I ended up just saying, hey, this isn't consistent with the brand experience that I've had in other places.
Well, that's a shame.
They gave me a couple more drink tickets and then said, well, we'll take feedback. And so I gave them feedback on the survey. I just didn't feel like that was the right call. That's just my opinion. I ended up sharing that in one of the groups I'm in, and I got mixed responses, I'll be honest. And again, I'm not like to be that kind of, do you know who I am sort of thing, but I felt the room was really good. The room was nice, no upgrade, didn't complain about not getting an upgrade. I get it. We're there for a weekend. It was, perfectly sufficient for what we needed. I didn't like the area though. There's some construction around. It was a double-edged sword, right? There was some construction around, but you were also like, only a couple of blocks from Raffles Hotel. So if you kind of go out one way, you don't realize there's construction and it's nice and you're just like a straight shot to Raffles Hotel and to other stuff over there. But if you want to go down by the marina and you go out the other way towards Suntec City, it just doesn't have nearly the relaxing experience. I also really like the Orchard Road and the intersection of Orchard Road and Scotts Road, which is probably about 10 or 15 minute walk away from the Andas. It's a little further away from, the more popular area. We were probably, I'd say, only like 3 or 4 blocks away from the Formula One circuit. So it's definitely one of the more, popular areas to be in. I just find that Orchard Road, Scotts Road area to be a little bit more kind of calm. And it's actually a nice walk to get, everywhere else. We usually stay at the Grand Hyatt, and the Grand Hyatt is still under, I think, renovations.
I've actually never stayed at the Grand Hyatt. I visited you at the Grand Hyatt, and we've enjoyed that lovely lounge together for a good amount of time, if I remember correctly. But I've actually never had a chance to stay at the Grand Hyatt.
Every time I've stayed at that Grand Hyatt, I've gotten upgraded to a suite. And maybe that's just something that's ingrained in me that I'm going to give them they get first right of refusal for me. But I've always found that Grand Hyatt to be very good. The other thing is the Andaz Singapore is 20,000 points a night. I think the Grand Hyatt used to be like 12,000. So, big difference. And obviously you've got the lounge versus you've got the single drink ticket. So, it's all about what you're there for. I think there's plenty of other great hotels that I'd like to try out before I return to the Andes.
Yeah, I've been a very big, I guess, formerly Starwood and now Marriott customer, I think, in Singapore, because I can think of many times I've been there. It was either the St. Regis or, of course, I haven't stayed there, but there's a Ritz-Carlton, there's a Marriott, there's a Westin, there's a lot of different options kind of in the Marriott world over there. I've stayed at a Four Points over there. I'm trying to think what else have I stayed at. There are a lot of options, and there are a lot of good options. And I know that our stay at the St. Regis was pretty good from the guys' trip that we just did. That episode just last, I guess. And, that's definitely another one that I wouldn't mind coming back to. But I guess I don't have to go to the Andas.
I like the St. Regis. We stayed at the Marriott Tang Plaza. Small rooms, but very nice other than that. And again, that location that I tend to prefer. And then we've also done I think it was the W over in Sentosa. That one was a little bit odd. It just felt like a concrete jungle. Ironically enough, out on Sentosa Island, the pool area was not terribly great. It just felt like there wasn't a lot of shade. It was not very close to Sentosa, so you had to take like a shuttle or something, like, whatever their local transport was. That's probably a really niche hotel for people that actually don't want to be in Singapore proper. And probably not a lot of people are venturing out to Sentosa. And if they are, they might just be taking the cable cars.
I'm really excited to hear about your stay in Bali. So I'm looking here at the notes here. So it looks like you stayed at the Hyatt Regency. Is that right?
Yeah, so the Hyatt Regency is sort of a new hotel, sort of, I guess I'll say. It used to be a larger property, and it used to be the Hyatt Valley in Sanur. And they closed it years before the pandemic. Like, I don't think it's ever been open when I've been to Bali. I could be wrong. I might have just missed it the first few years. Usually I stay down in Nusa Dua at the Grand Hyatt, but I heard that the Nusa Dua shops had just gotten massacred by the pandemic, and we didn't want to be like kind of in that golden ghetto if there are no shops around. So we wanted to try the new hotel. And so what they did was they took the old Hyatt Bali property and they kind of split it in half. And so half is an Andaz Bali, and then the other half they made the Hyatt Regency Bali. And it's, beautiful properties, nice pools, really comfortable. Just, I would say it hits well above its 5,000 points per night price tag.
Unfortunately, not much longer for this world, right? At the 5,000 point price point, right? It's part of the recent announcements around category changes, right? If I'm not mistaken, the Hyatt Regency Bali is one of the ones getting an upgrade to Category 2.
Yeah, even at a category 2, I think you're still getting
Good value.
You're still getting good value. So they had a Regency Club. Regency Club was wonderful. They even had live music.
Oh,
They had some, the drum players, I guess, or I can't think of what the Polynesian music is.
I am drawing a blank too, but the drums there's a specific name for them.
Yes. And so they had those folks there during the evening hour, 2 hours, which was wonderful. The food was actually really, really good. We ended up eating off property probably 4 or 5 times, but the food in the lounge was actually really good, and they swapped it out a few times. And they had, some of the local specialties. They had some other non-local. They had some skewers. They skewered something different every night. They had teriyaki chicken one night. They had eel another night.
Oh, your
I think
favorite.
they had some other seafood. Yes. Oh, eel. Yes. Yes.
I'm sure.
There's
you have
nothing
plenty
better
of
than
eel.
Oh,
Gamelan, by the
gosh.
way, Indonesian drums are gamelan.
Gamelan. You are so quick with that Google. That's awesome.
I guess I'm the producer.
Apparently, at least this episode. But yeah, really great experience. I thought the property's right on the beach, and I found that the Sanur beach was much, much nicer than what they've got down in Nusa Dua.
Oh, interesting. What
It's still,
the quality of the sand? What is it that's better about it?
I felt like the quality of the sand, and it's still protected, but like you can actually go into the water without walking for a mile. Like
Okay, got
I
it.
remember like the unevenness of the Grand Hyatt's beach, where like it just didn't kind of go down. It just didn't get deep at all. This one you could go, you'd have to walk a little bit, and then you'd start to get into kind of more meaningful water to enjoy. It was the beautiful blue color, which we hadn't seen really in the Nusa Dua area.
Yeah, this is like a point that, I wanted to make about Bali is, like for those who haven't been there, there's a lot of beaches in Bali, but not all the beaches are going to be as picturesque as maybe what you're thinking of like a Caribbean beach or beach in the Maldives or Fiji or Tahiti or something like that. There are plenty of beaches where the water is a little bit murky, a little bit more kind of has some more sediment and not quite as picturesque. So I'm really excited to go to this beach if you're telling me the water is kind of blue, because that's kind of what I've seen in Indonesia, but not as much on Bali. It was some of the smaller islands that I saw those kind of like blue, white sand type beaches. And so if you're telling me that Sanur beach is that kind, I'm kind of excited to check it out, because I know quite a few of like the ones in Nusa Dua, the ones in Seminyak, the ones in like Jimbaran, all those different beach areas of Bali. Generally, the beaches themselves have been, I wouldn't call the prettiest beaches, and as far as tropical beach resort type places go.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I don't know that I've been to Seminyak or Jimbaran, but I found this to be, more similar to Kuta. Although Kuta was the only beach that I've ever seen in Bali that seems like they could actually do surfing on. This beach was anything but. This beach felt like you were
More protected
had
cove,
that
kind
beautiful.
of.
Yeah. I mean, it wasn't a cove, but they had like a kind of a jetty or something that kind of broke up the waves
A breakwater.
a little further out. A breakwater, yeah, we'll call it a breakwater. I'm sure that's probably not the right term because it kind of went parallel to the beach. But yeah, I found that to be really good. It felt kind of more like Gulf of Mexico versus Atlantic. If you're using the two coasts in Florida, just based on the waves. There was one wave that came in that was enough to knock our daughter off her feet when she was in the water for the first time in her life at a beach. She took that really well, thankfully. But that's probably the largest wave that we saw the entire time we were there.
So back to the hotel for a second. Does it share very many amenities or facilities with the Andaz, or are they pretty separate?
They share the spa, I think. I think
Okay.
that's the only thing that they do share, though. We didn't end up walking around too much of the Andaz, but we walked by it on the beach side. So the one thing that Sennaar has that I really appreciated, especially having our daughter in a stroller, was they have a concrete path that goes along the beach. So you can like walk up and down. They've got some, beachside restaurants where you can get your nasi goreng or nasi lemak. You can try, the different things, the different local foods and, walk by other hotels, that sort of thing. And we're walkers, so that was really convenient for us. But the Andaz looked really similar, like in design and everything. Like once the spa, or it was either the spa or the front desk told us, yeah, this used to be, all one hotel. It was really clear that the design changes were minimal, I would say. It felt like there was maybe the lounge chairs were a little bit different, but largely, the hard stuff all seems pretty consistent.
I have a question. So did you guys decide to arrange transportation with the hotel, or what did you guys just do? Just take a taxi?
We arranged hotel transfer from the airport to the hotel because we just didn't want to risk anything because we were arriving like 9, 10 o'clock at night. No, it was like 10 or 11 by the time we got there. And we thought that might have like helped with, logistics. I even arranged early for like a child seat. There was no child seat. I was disappointed with that. Apparently that's fairly common, but I did
Mm-hmm.
I did have a word with the guest services person and they were kind enough. Well, they said that they would honor or give us the ride back to the airport for free.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't. It was on the bill. The guest services manager did ensure that there was a car seat and she did see us off. And candidly, the cost of the transfer, even through the hotel, was not so much that I was going to complain about that. I complain about some things, but I wasn't going to
Right.
make a big deal about, hey,
Well, it
you said you'd
wasn't
cover
worth
this.
making a case out of. So how much was the transfer?
It was like $20, I think.
Yeah, that's very
And,
reasonable.
and my feeling was, they probably need the $20 more than I do.
It's probably fair.
For everything that we spent in Bali, I felt like it was still a really, really great value. We even got massages. Not only did we get one massage, we got like a foot massage each, and it was so good and such a reasonable value. I think we spent less than $100 for 90 minutes worth of massages per person.
Mm-hmm. Well, Bali just in general, it's still a wonderful destination for really stretching your travel budget. I think again, it's a place where you can have a very comfortable beach getaway and not have to dig too deep into the wallet. And, especially for, all the different meals and things like that. I mean, of course, my experience has been at the resorts themselves, they'll pretty much charge you, what we're used to with US prices, but, just venture a little bit off the beaten path and, you'll find a lot of good options that are a lot cheaper.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Our lunches were generally about $2 to $3
Yep.
for all three of us. And sometimes that even included a drink. Sometimes I might have paid another $1 or $2 for a drink. But in the old days when we were doing Nusa Dua, we'd get massages for like $10. We just didn't feel like we could work the logistics as easily, trading off our daughter and doing it at a non-hotel location. So we paid a little bit of a
You
premium.
have to give up you give up a little bit there, a new dad traveling the world.
But it was just a great experience. And sometimes you don't realize how much nicer it is to actually have a treatment in a spa versus like on a beach side on like some, kind of bamboo mat. There are some nice things about having, a true spa experience.
Well, I am definitely inspired. I would love to go back to Bali, go back to Singapore. I have not been to the Hyatt Regency. I have not been to the Jewel or the Andaz, but I might leave the Andaz off my list. That being said, I'm really excited. Hopefully one of these days I'll make it back sooner than later, although I will say that the award availability on our favorite carriers has definitely not made it easy.
No, it's definitely hard. We're trying to get back there one more time this year, and then still starting to plan a trip next year, and even far out. The award availability is just not what we're used to.
Not what it's used to. Not what we've been, I guess, what we are accustomed to, and now I guess realize maybe that was the golden age of award travel, at least in the near term.
We might look back at it in that way, and definitely Singapore is definitely one of those timeless cities. So whenever the award availability starts to flow back, I think that's definitely a place that'll continue to always be on our list.
Here's hoping that some of these Asian carriers start getting a little bit too exuberant and sending lots of wide bodies over the ocean. with empty seats. So hopefully they'll offer up a couple of us for us miles and points people. Anyway,
Absolutely.
Trevor, anything else you want to say to the folks about your wonderful Southeast Asian adventure?
No, I just hope more of us can get back out there. That availability has just been so tough, and it's just a great part of the world.
Yep. Well, I'm glad you were able to make it. It sounds like you put together a pretty amazing trip. I'm very jealous. I am excited to go back as soon as I can as well. Hopefully, maybe with you, maybe with your family. I'd be excited to do it. But I guess we'll save some of that for hopefully a future travel story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's the show. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoyed listening.
Join us next time for Travel Stories. Until then, we hope your next story is a travel story.